Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Nerdy Multiverse and yet another breakdown. Today we will be breaking down and giving our initial thoughts on the 5th episode of the newest spin-off Walking Dead series following Daryl Dixon in France. The Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon, of course. And the title of this episode in English, I believe, translates to Two Loves, referring to the quote-unquote love triangle with Quinn, Anna, and Isabelle. And this episode starts off with Daryl and Laurent on board their boat making their way to the nest, as Aslan drives them there. The nest is a location that we still don't know much about except that it's where Laurent is meant to be. But Aslan does explain to Daryl that Laurent will be safe there and he will become the leader that he is destined to be, comparing him to that of Abraham from the Bible, almost as if this whole thing is a prophecy to them. We then actually cut to a flashback, which is a major part of this episode overall, as we go back and forth between present day and these flashbacks. And in this first flashback scene, we see Daryl walking his motorcycle down a street as he has ran out of fuel. And a truck pulls up and a guy offers to help him out with this fuel as long as he's good with that crossbow, which obviously we all know that he is because that is his iconic weapon. This man takes Daryl to an old gas station that seems to be a sort of trading post now, and they request all of the people here to conduct an operation in gathering live walkers. They even have specifications for what they want: no children walkers, no elderly walkers, and none under 5 feet 4 inches. Obviously, they have plans for these walkers, as we do see later on in this episode. And depending on how many walkers these people bring back, the more supplies that they get back in return. But there are also rules here, such as no fighting or stealing. And if anyone conducts in any of these, the consequences are pretty severe, as we do see later. Now, one of the guys working at the trading post here is actually the scientist or doctor that works for Madame Janae. So we can put 2 and 2 together and figure out why they are gathering walkers in this flashback scene. A young guy named TJ is doing this all alone, and he tries to join some people, but he just gets made fun of and practically harassed. And obviously, Daryl is going to outshine everyone else here, even the large groups, as he brings in the most amount of walkers and finally gets a fuel that he needs, which is what he was after this entire time, so that he could refill his bike and return home. We then see Daryl, Laurent, and Aslan stop their boat ride to make camp for the night on land, where Daryl tries to teach Laurent how to gut a fish for food, but Laurent is uncomfortable with this idea as he grew up as a vegetarian and worries that this would be disobeying and breaking his oath to God. But Daryl and Aslan assure him that God would understand, especially under these circumstances. Daryl ends up opening up a bit and telling Laurent a bit more about his own personal life and those that are waiting back home for him. He mentions RJ and Judith Grimes, Ezekiel, Connie, and of course his best friend, Carol. Finally cutting back to Isabelle and catching up with her as she wakes up inside of a mansion occupied by Quinn and his men, who drugged her to keep her asleep. She prays for Daryl and Laurent, hoping that they made it out of the city, as she is interrupted by Quinn himself. She ridicules him for drugging her, but all he seems to want is for their quote-unquote love to be rekindled and fixed. And when Quinn leaves the room, she looks through it and ends up making a shiv out of the border of a mirror. Clearly, she has plans to eliminate Quinn. Now nighttime, Laurent prays in his shelter for Daryl and his friends before heading off to bed, while Daryl and Aslan speak outside near the fire. Daryl says that he made a promise to those back at home, which is why he is so keen on getting a boat and leaving so quickly. But Aslan tells him that sometimes a bigger cause or new connections to others can overshadow a promise that was made. But obviously, Daryl refutes that. As we head back into the flashbacks, as a young guy, TJ, begs the other American, Juno, to let him go with his group and gather the next batch of walkers. He says that he will consider it as long as TJ keeps their fire going all night long, where Daryl shows his decency once more and teaches the boy how to properly chop firewood, where TJ tells Daryl that he's doing this for his girl who's being held prisoner by her own father, and this is the only way to get fuel for them to escape. While Quinn meets with Isabelle and they have dinner together, Quinn acts like that typical crazy ex, practically begging for forgiveness and desperately. During this all, Anna arrives at the mansion and figures out what's going on. Isabelle tricks Quinn by seducing him and she nearly kills him with her homemade shiv, but stops herself last minute as he goes on about redemption. Once Quinn leaves the room, he is met by Anna outside, who has been waiting for him this entire time. She breaks her glass on the floor on purpose and storms out of the room. Back at the trading post in the flashbacks, Daryl uses their radio to try and reach Carol back at the Commonwealth or Alexandria. It doesn't seem to be going through, but it eventually does and the two catch up. He tells her that he's in Maine and will be heading back home very shortly. Now she sounds a bit off here and Daryl seems a bit worried about it, but she assures him that she's fine. And as soon as the radio starts to break up a bit, she cuts out a bit at the start and says that somebody came back, leaving Daryl and all of us fans in shock and theorizing about who she was talking about. Now, realistically, this could be anybody, and it does sound like she started to say Rick, as it cuts off and you can sort of hear the ick part of the word Rick. But if it was Rick, you would think that she would have immediately told him about it, right? So maybe it was somebody else. Possibly somebody like Morgan Jones. As we know, he did leave Fear the Walking Dead to return back to Alexandria and look for Rick himself. But I think overall that this is definitely intended to be a big hint towards Rick Grimes and his return. Back in the present day once more, Daryl is kept awake and alerted by the noises of walkers near their camp. And unfortunately, Aslan ends up dying, but he points Daryl in the right direction after giving him his pocket watch, which has the depiction of what we can assume is the nest on it. And regarding this pocket watch, Daryl told Aslan earlier in this episode that he is one of the only people that he knows that still carries one of those around. And this just reminded me of Herschel and how he carried one of them around and then handed it down to Glenn. After burying Aslan, Laurent pays his respects and the two head off, only for Daryl to find out that their boat is gone and the rope has been cut. But it wasn't stolen or anything, as Laurent himself cut the rope. And in a very intense scene, Daryl scolds Laurent to the fullest. Laurent explains that he did it because he lost everyone he loves and cares about, and he doesn't want to lose Daryl when they get to the nest. So they do end up making up and continuing their way to the nest by walking alongside and following the river, as Aslan told them to do. Along the way, Laurent tells Daryl that he wants to go back with him to America, but obviously Daryl made that promise to Isabelle to deliver Laurent to the nest. The two are then caught and captured by Madame Janae's men on the streets, even after Daryl put himself in harm's way and sent Laurent on his own to go run off. Back at Quinn's mansion, Isabelle is brought breakfast, but the woman serving her reveals a note left under the plate, saying to her that this is a delivery from a friend. As to who it's from, we actually don't learn or know. Quinn then meets with Isabelle once more and gives her a necklace, and Isabelle actually accepts it, and tries to put the idea in his head that she is coming back to him, as the two head to Madame Janae's place to meet with her. But once they get there, Isabelle notices Falou, Sylvie, and Emile standing in line outside of this fortress. As for what they are doing there, we aren't too sure yet, but maybe they also have something planned. Madame Janae greets the two and takes them to a few cells, and Anna is already there. So something is up, and Janae reveals Daryl being held in the cell, clearly being outed by Anna, who has gone against Quinn's deal with Isabelle, as he promised her to allow them to leave the city. And due to his involvement with this, Janae has Quinn placed in the cell with Daryl as well. Now both of them are prisoners of Madame Janae, and the tensions are clearly very high. Janae then brings Isabelle to her office where she and Laurent reunite once again. And Janae explains that she needs Laurent to appear in front of everyone at the show later on tonight, to show that the Union of Hope are not her enemy. Daryl is then taken out of his cell and into a fighting pit where everyone watches over, all while Janae gives a speech about hope and unity, and today they punish their enemies. As they release a walker into the fighting pit with Daryl and eject it with a tranquilizer, powering it up and making it faster, stronger, and more aggressive. So another variant walker. Now back in the flashback again as Juno and his group return with their new batch of walkers. It's shown that TJ is now a walker himself and coincidentally gathered by them. So clearly they killed him and Daryl knows this and a fight ensues. Daryl and Juno fought, so they broke the rules here. The consequence? Being taken aboard the boat full of walkers that Daryl escaped, being the reason as to how he got to France in the first place. On board the boat are tons and tons of walkers, including ones that are being experimented on being turned into more variants, and in turn, weaponized. These people on the boat feed the prisoners to the walkers and nearly feed Daryl to them, but this was clearly planned by Daryl to escape, as he takes down the guards and sets chaos on the boat, even letting Juno free after all of their conflict. As the two get the lifeboat ready for departure, one of the variant walkers escaped its holding and sprints up the stairs and throws Juno around, tearing him apart. After it tanks a full hit to the head, Daryl jumps overboard the ship and onto the lifeboat, as explosions go off on the boat. Back in present day, Daryl picks up the axe given to him as the variant walker inside of the arena sprints right at him, leaving us on a cliffhanger as to what happens next, as this is where the episode ends off. And wow, overall, this episode was absolutely incredible, and honestly, one of the best pieces of The Walking Dead that we have had in a few years. The connections, the acting, the action, just everything about it was super entertaining and phenomenal. The amount of characterization and world building in this show is awesome, and everyone and everything is so interesting, and I love that. Now, we have so much to talk about as fans with that major hint towards a character's return, which is really cool to see. I love when The Walking Dead and its fandom feels so alive and hyped about the future, especially after all of the ups and downs with the franchise that we all love. And personally, I think I would actually rate this episode a full 10 out of 10. I absolutely love this one and can't wait to see what happens in the season finale next week. But of course, I would like to hear about your thoughts on this episode as well, so make sure to leave them down below. Thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed our breakdown and review on this episode, don't forget to give it a like, and with that being said, we will see you all the next time that we go through and explore the nerdy multiverse.